Introduction. Echoes of Forgotten Legends. The Grand Archive of the Zalari Dominion was a monument to knowledge, an obsidian monolith floating within the gas clouds of the Veil Nebula, where scholars from dozens of species gathered to pore over the ancient records of the known universe. There, among the oldest star maps and the dust-covered relics of civilizations long vanished, lay the whispers of a legend that most deemed nothing more than fiction. The myth of humanity. High Scholar Zalreth, an elder of the reptilian Zalari race, ran his elongated fingers over the brittle pages of a forbidden manuscript. His secondary eyelids flickered in disbelief as he read the account, transcribed from an even older source, an artifact retrieved from a derelict starship found adrift in the void. The script detailed an ancient war, a conflict so brutal and merciless that its echoes had supposedly been erased from history. The opposing force was a species called humans. They came from the Black, not as conquerors, but as something far worse, survivors. Their ships were not grown from the song of the stars, nor woven from the celestial strands as ours are. No! They were forged in the crucible of war. Metal and fire, rage and vengeance. They do not yield. They do not retreat. They burn. They break. And if they fall, they rise again. Pray you never see their fleet on the horizon, for if you do, it is already too late. Zalreth exhaled, his frilled crest rising with unease. He had spent decades unraveling the fragments of this supposed myth, convinced that the humans were nothing more than the fevered imaginings of a civilization lost to time. Yet, as more data emerged from the galactic frontier, reports hinted at something terrifying. Entire colonies had gone silent in the void. Warships of the Korthan Empire, one of the most feared and ruthless factions in the galaxy, had been found drifting, gutted from the inside out, their hulls melted with a force unknown. The Korthan themselves, a race of insectoid conquerors, had dismissed the disappearances as the work of a rogue faction. But Zalreth knew better. The signs all pointed to a single, horrifying possibility. The humans were real, and they were coming. In the capital world of the Korthan Empire, Supreme Warlord Chirikvok towered over his council. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the dim red glow of the war chamber. "We have ruled unchallenged for millennia," he hissed, mandibles clicking in agitation. "Yet now, entire fleets are vanishing into the abyss. The survivors we have found speak of ghosts, shadows of impossible craft, emerging from the dark, wielding weapons that defy our knowledge." A holographic projection flickered to life, a captured distress signal from one of their lost fleets. The transmission was distorted, filled with static and screaming. But one phrase came through clearly, spoken in a language that had not been heard in thousands of years. "We are the descendants of those you tried to erase. We have not forgotten, and we do not forgive." A cold dread settled over the War Council. The myth of humanity was no myth at all, and their vengeance had only just begun. Chapter 1. The First Shadow. The Korthan Empire had ruled the known galaxy with Talon and fire for millennia. Their war fleets numbered in the tens of thousands. Their soldiers were engineered for slaughter, and their dominion stretched across entire sectors, crushing weaker civilizations beneath their inexorable advance. They feared no enemy. No force had ever been strong enough to challenge their supremacy. Until now. Supreme Warlord Chirikvok stood in the vast command chamber of the Tyrant's Fong, the largest and most powerful battleship ever constructed by his species. The air within the chamber was thick with the scent of burning resins, a Korthan ritual meant to instill clarity before war. Before him, a strategic holomap displayed a newly acquired sector, one that should have been empty, and yet Something stirred within it. "This is where our fleets have gone missing," Chirikvok growled, his mandibles twitching as he pointed a clawed digit toward the void between stars. "Sector 87 Theta. Uncharted space. We send an entire hunter armada to cleanse it. Not a single vessel returned." The warlords and strategists gathered before him exchanged uneasy glances. These were the fiercest minds of the Empire, conquerors who had laid waste to 100 species without hesitation. Yet now, fear crept into their multifaceted eyes. "The few distress signals we intercepted spoke of an unknown enemy," General Zalrith said, his voice clicking with unease. "Something fast. Something unnatural. They do not fight as the prey does. They do not flee. They hunt." Chirikvok curled his claws into a fist. "We are the apex predators of this galaxy," he hissed. "We will not be hunted." The warlords straightened, reassured by their leader's conviction. But deep in their cores, a primal unease remained. For the first time in living memory, the Korthan were not the ones instilling terror. Abyssal silence. The horizon veil drifted through the black, her hull as dark as the void itself. Unlike the sleek, organic designs of the galactic races, this vessel was something other. It was human. Commander Elias Rain stood on the bridge, staring at the holographic display before him. The Korthan fleet was moving. A full battle formation, their numbers vast. He exhaled slowly, hands tightening behind his back. "They took their time," he muttered. Beside him, Lieutenant Sophia Carter smirked, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "You almost sound disappointed, sir." Rains turned, his sharp blue eyes unreadable. "No, just reflective." He gestured toward the enemy formation. "You see that?" Carter frowned. "They're positioning to box us in." "Exactly. They still think they're the apex predators." Rains exhaled, shaking his head. "That's the problem with species that have never lost a war. They don't know what it means to fight for survival." A new voice chimed in, deep, synthesized. "Multiple enemy signals detected. Estimated fleet size: 200 capital ships, 1,500 support vessels. Weapons signatures consistent with plasma-based kinetics." It was the ship's AI, designation Oracle. Carter whistled. "Hell of a welcoming party." Rains nodded. "They don't know what they're dealing with." He turned to his officers. "Battle stations. Signal the fleet. It's time." The first strike. The Korthan fleet emerged into real space in perfect formation. Rows upon rows of warships materialized, their metallic hulls reflecting the distant starlight. Aboard the Tyrant's Fong, Warlord Chirikvok leaned forward, mandibles clacking in anticipation. "Initiate sector-wide scan." The moment the scanners activated, the Korthan officers recoiled in shock. Where there had been empty void, there were now shadows. Dozens, hundreds, thousands, human warships. They had been waiting. Before the Korthan could react, the black void erupted. Blazing white lances of particle beam fire slashed across the darkness. Korthan vessels ignited instantly, their shields torn apart like paper. The human fleet was smaller, but they fought with precision. They didn't move in predictable formations. They struck, vanished, and struck again, like predators far more ancient than the Korthan had ever imagined. Shock rippled through the War Council. The humans weren't running. They weren't defending. They were butchering. Chirikvok roared. "Return fire. All ships. Fire everything." A storm of plasma torpedoes and energy bolts screamed through the void. The battle had begun. But deep in his core, Chirikvok felt something unfamiliar. For the first time in his life, he felt fear. Chapter 2: Predators in the Dark. The void burned. Columns of fire erupted as Korthan warships died in the cold abyss, their hulls breaking apart under the sheer force of human weapons. The Horizon Veil spearheaded the assault, her railguns glowing white-hot as hypersonic slugs punched through Korthan battlecruisers like they were made of glass. Commander Elias Rains stood firm on the bridge, his eyes scanning the tactical display. The Korthan fleet, despite its overwhelming numbers, was in complete disarray. Their formations, once rigid and disciplined, were collapsing under the sheer brutality of the human assault. Enemy fleet at 63% combat effectiveness, Oracle reported in its cold, synthetic voice. 37 capital ships destroyed, 64 crippled. Lieutenant Carter exhaled, half in awe, half in grim satisfaction. Jesus, they have no idea how to handle us. They've never fought something like us before, Rains murmured. They're used to crushing civilizations that beg for mercy. He turned to his weapons officer. And we don't beg. A new alert chimed on the hollow display. Enemy reinforcements, a second Korthan armada, were inbound, their massive signatures lighting up the scanners like a supernova. Looks like they finally realized we're not a myth, Carter muttered. Rains narrowed his eyes. Then let's remind them why we were forgotten in the first place. A history of silence. Millennia ago, the Korthan Empire had not been the galactic power. They had been one among many. The galaxy had once been a place of war, a chaotic battleground of empires locked in endless bloodshed. But then the Korthan had discovered something, a force that had shattered the balance. The humans, not an empire, not a coalition, something far worse. They hadn't expanded through diplomacy or careful alliances. They had survived. Every war waged against them had only honed them further. Their weapons did not rely on the elegant, flowing energies of the universe. They used raw, unfiltered violence. And when the other species realized what they had unleashed, they had done the unthinkable. They had erased them. Entire fleets had been sent to exterminate humanity. Every colony, every outpost, every trace of their existence had been systematically destroyed. It had taken centuries, but in the end, humanity had vanished from the records. Or so they had thought. Now, the ghosts of that forgotten past had returned, and they were not pleased. The second wave. The second Korthan fleet arrived in formation, their numbers eclipsing even the first armada. Warship after warship dropped out of FDL, surrounding the battlefield like a steel noose. Aboard the Tyrant's Fong, Supreme Warlord Chirkvok felt his earlier fear boil away. He was the master of the Korthan war machine. He had conquered countless worlds. He had devoured civilizations. These humans, these relics, were nothing but a footnote in history. Engage the second wave, he roared. We will grind them into dust. The Horizon Veil scanners flared with new targets. Carter's smirk faded. They're trying to encircle us. Rains nodded. It won't work. They're still thinking like conquerors. What do you mean? Rains's voice was quiet, but there was iron beneath it. They think we fight for territory. His gaze hardened. We don't. The doctrine of war. Humanity did not fight for dominion. They fought for survival. Where the Korthan expanded through subjugation, humanity's wars had been something else. They had fought extinction-level wars. Wars where surrender had meant annihilation. Every conflict had tempered them, reforging them into something neither the Korthan nor any other species could comprehend. And that was why, at that moment, as the Korthan fleet surged forward with overwhelming force, the human fleet vanished. The Ghost Fleet strikes. Corthan's sensors scrambled. Their ships, their weapons, their targeting systems. Nothing could detect the enemy fleet. It was as if they had never been there at all. Panic spread through their ranks. And then, without warning, they came from behind. Blazing railgun slugs, hypersonic missiles, kinetic bombardments. Every single human warship had flanked the Corthan without them even realizing it. The first volley alone shattered their formation. The Corthan screamed. Ships were torn apart in an instant. Their reinforced hulls ripped open by human munitions that did not stop. A Corthan dreadnought, a behemoth nearly 20 kilometers long, was bisected by a human orbital lance, its molten halves drifting apart like severed limbs. Inside the tyrant's fong, chaos erupted. Chirikvok staggered. How? How are they? They used false signatures, his censor officer shrieked. They fed us ghost readings. They made us think they were in front of us while they looped around. Another explosion rocked the ship as a human battleship rammed straight through one of the Corthan flagships. Not a collision, a boarding action. The ghosts had come for them in the flesh. The last transmission. Deep inside the wreckage of the Corthan Armada, a final transmission was recorded. A desperate, static-filled scream from one of the last surviving warlords. They are not myths. They are not ghosts. They have returned. The message cut off as a single human soldier, battle-worn armor marked with ancient insignias, stared directly into the Corthan camera, his face illuminated by fire and destruction. Then he spoke. You erased us once. Now we erase you. The feed went dark. Final chapter. Extinction debt. Burning thrones. The tyrant's fong drifted through the wreckage of what had once been the greatest war fleet in the known galaxy. Corthan ships, torn, broken, lifeless, floated in the void like shattered bones. Fire still burned inside some of them, oxygen leaking into the abyss as their crews perished in silence. The horizon veil hovered above it all like an executioner's blade. Inside the Corthan command chamber, Supreme Warlord Chirikvok struggled to his feet. His exoskeletal plates were cracked, the thick ichor of his kind leaking onto the charred deck. The once mighty throne room, where he had dictated the fate of 1,000 species, was now a ruin. Consoles sparked, support beams twisted from the relentless bombardment, and the air reeked of burnt chitin and ozone. He staggered toward the tactical holomap. It flickered weakly, barely functioning, but what it displayed was unmistakable. His empire's entire grand fleet had been wiped out. His mandibles trembled. How? He hissed. How did we lose? The answer came not from his own kind, but from the darkness. Footsteps echoed through the ruined chamber. Slow, methodical, human. Chirikvok turned, and there they stood. 4 figures clad in battle-worn armor, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. Their leader, a man with piercing blue eyes and an expression of cold finality, stepped forward. Commander Elias Rains. Chirikvok bared his fangs. What are you? Rains stared at him for a long moment, then answered. The consequence of your arrogance. Then he raised his weapon. A single gunshot rang out. The supreme warlord of the Corthan Empire collapsed, his ichor pooling around him. The age of Corthan dominance was over. The reckoning. Across the galaxy, the fall of the Corthan fleet sent shockwaves through every civilization. The once unstoppable conquerors, the monsters who had terrorized the stars for centuries, had been eradicated in a single campaign. And the ones who had done it, the humans, they were supposed to be myths. But myths don't send ultimatums. And that's exactly what the survivors received. A single transmission, broadcast across every star system once controlled by the Korthan. You tried to erase us. You failed. We have returned. For those who stood against the Korthan, we bring friendship. For those who stood aside, we bring warning. For those who aided them, we bring war. The future is written in fire. As the human fleet moved through the ruins of the Korthan Dominion, one thing became clear. Humanity had not come to rule. They had come to balance the scales. And for the first time in galactic history, the stars feared their return. Because when myths step out of the darkness, they do not ask for permission. They take vengeance. Final transmission, Galactic Senate meeting. We once thought humanity was a ghost story, an echo of a long-dead species. We laughed at the warnings. We called them myths. We dismissed them. But myths do not send war fleets. Myths do not burn empires to the ground. Myths do not stand at the edge of the void and demand justice. We were wrong. Humanity has returned, and the galaxy will never be the same again